Today, I invite us to reflect on the significance of this momentous day and to draw inspiration from God's Word. There was a couple who decided to go to Hawaii for some time away, but because they both worked, they were having trouble coordinating their schedules. So they decided that the husband would go first, a day early, and his wife would join him the next day. When he got there, the husband emailed his wife from his laptop, but he accidentally mistyped her email address and sent it off without realizing that. A widow had just returned from her husband's funeral. He was a minister of many years who'd been called home to glory following a heart attack. The widow checked her email when she got home, expecting messages from relatives and friends. But instead she found this: "I just arrived and I've checked in. I see that everything has been prepared for your arrival tomorrow. Looking forward to seeing you then. Hope your journey was as uneventful as mine. P.S. Sure is hot down here." We all make mistakes. Some of them are big ones. But it's especially sad when we don't learn from our mistakes or from the mistakes that others make. It's been said that history can help us understand the present and inform the future. So let's travel back to April 9th, 1865. At the courthouse in Virginia, General Robert E. Lee surrendered his Confederate troops to the Union's Ulysses S. Grant, making the end of an excruciating 4-year-long battle. The Civil War came to a close, but a number of African Americans across the United States were still enslaved, forced to continue as if freedom didn't exist. And this was especially the case in Texas, where thousands of enslaved people weren't freed until June 19, 1865. Their long-awaited celebration would serve as the foundation of the day we celebrate tomorrow, Juneteenth. In commemorating this day, we're also forced to face one of the most painful parts of our national history. How can we, as a country, as a state, as a community, as individuals, continue to heal from our past and make a difference here, now? In an interview at the University of Kentucky, Vanessa Holden, who's an assistant professor of history and African American and African studies at the university, says it's vital to acknowledge emancipation as a prolonged process. Learning about how Black people and white allies strategized, fought for, and won freedom can help guide us in the present. Taking a hard look at the systems that reinforce inequality, many of which are descended from an era of emancipation politics and violence, can help us foster meaningful change. So let's take a look at Psalm 78. This psalm was written by a man named Asaph, a prophet and a poet. He was one of King David's chief musicians, and as one of the Levites, he helped lead the music before the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem. These first 11 verses of the psalm that we read this morning are a passage that encourages us to remember God's faithfulness and the importance of passing down our stories to future generations. The psalmist begins by calling his listeners to pay close attention, to incline their ears toward the wisdom of the past. In the context of Juneteenth, we remember the painful history of slavery and the struggle for freedom. We remember lives lost hardships endured, and the resilience displayed by previous generations. And it's crucial that we never forget the stories of the past, for in remembering, we honor the sacrifices made and gain a deeper understanding of the journey toward liberation for all of God's children. I've learned that in the years following June 19th, 1865, bitter violence was unleashed against formerly enslaved people. Legislation was passed to deny them the opportunity to commemorate their freedom in the public parks. In the spirit of resistance, these spiritual ancestors banded together. They purchased their own land to hold their commemorations. And they also carried those commemorations with them into the diaspora of the Great Migration northwards. They kept their sacred story alive so that we now, in the spirit of going back to reclaim what is necessary from the past, can reflect on that past. Juneteenth is a day that symbolizes hope, resilience, and the tireless pursuit of freedom. A pursuit that we today are no less faced with. How are we, as the hands and feet of Jesus, who dined with tax collectors and sinners, working to resist and defy forces of oppression in our own times, in our own contexts, in our own communities? How are each of us, as individuals, as the gathered community of WCUC, continuing the work of dismantling oppression and injustice right here, right now? The psalmist emphasized how important it was to pass down God's works from one generation to the next. We're called to teach our children and future generations about the struggles and the triumphs of those who came before us. And when we do, we ensure that the lessons of history aren't lost and that the torch of liberation continues to burn brightly. As we remember, we recognize that our journey toward true liberation isn't complete yet. We acknowledge the systemic injustices that still persist, the racial disparities that continue to plague our society, and the work that lies ahead. Just as our ancestors made mistakes, just as that gentleman made a mistake in sending his email, so have we, individually and collectively. But let us draw strength from God's faithfulness and the lessons that we can learn from history. On this Juneteenth, we gather in gratitude for the progress made, and we gather in determination to continue the journey toward full liberation for each and every one of God's beloved children. We remember those sacrifices of those who came before us, and we honor their memory by teaching the next generation their stories. May we learn from the mistakes of the past, recognizing our role in dismantling systemic injustice and working toward a future where freedom, equality, and justice prevail. As we move forward, let us hold on to the words of the psalmist, remembering God's faithfulness throughout all of history. Amen.